Who hurt you? 3 words. That's all he said. 3 words, quiet, low, and steady, and the entire diner went silent. Emma froze. Her hand trembled around the coffee pot. No one had ever asked her that. Not her mother, not her friends, not a single soul in 28 years of living had looked at her the way this man did, this enormous leather-clad biker with scars on his knuckles and grief written somewhere deep behind his eyes. She didn't answer. She couldn't. But Marcus Reaper Stone was already decided. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning Cedar Falls got its conscience shaken loose, started like every other morning in a town that had learned to mind its own business. Margaret's diner sat on the corner of Route 9 and Elm, like it always had, a low flat roof building with a hand-painted sign, 4 ceiling fans that never quite cooled anything down, and booths that had absorbed 20 years of small-town conversation. The kind of place where people talked about the weather and the high school football team and whose barn needed a new roof. The kind of place where people had learned over a long time that some things were better left unsaid. Emma had worked there for 3 years. She knew every regular by name. She knew who took cream, who took sugar, who liked their eggs runny, and who would send them back twice before accepting them. She knew the sound the front door made when it swung open, that particular squeak on the 3rd hinge. And she knew by sound alone whether it was someone coming in for breakfast or someone coming in for trouble. On this particular Tuesday morning in late July, she heard the engines before she heard anything else. Not one engine, not two. A wall of sound, deep rolling mechanical thunder that started somewhere up Route 9 and grew until it rattled the windows in their frames and made old Harold Briggs, who was sitting in booth 4 with his newspaper and his decaf, look up for the first time in 3 years. "Lord Almighty," Harold said. Emma stepped to the window. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. Gleaming chrome and black metal rolling in 2 by 2, filling the parking lot like a slow, deliberate tide. The riders were large men, most of them with leather vests and road-worn faces, and the kind of posture that didn't ask permission from anybody. She counted 12 before she stopped counting. Their cuts, the leather vests had a death's head patch on the back, and 3 words she recognized from the news, from whispered conversations, from the particular way her mother had once told her to cross the street if she ever saw them coming. Hell's Angels. Behind her, she heard the swing of the kitchen door. "Emma," Derek's voice. Flat and tight, the way it got when he wanted to remind her of something without saying it directly. "Table 6 needs a refill. Stop standing around." She turned. He was leaning against the door frame with his arms folded. Her boyfriend of 4 years, the man who managed the kitchen, the man who had her phone's location on at all times, in a particular look he gave her that she had spent years learning to read before it became something else. Today he was wearing that look already, and it wasn't even 8 in the morning. "I know what you were doing," Derek said. He wasn't shouting. He never shouted in public. That was one of the things about Derek. He had a whole language that didn't use volume. "Go. Work." She went. The bell above the door rang that familiar squeak, and the first of them came in. He didn't duck his head the way tall men sometimes do in low doorways. He just came through, and the air in the room seemed to rearrange itself around him. He was 6'3", maybe taller, with broad shoulders, a dark beard threaded with silver, and eyes the color of a winter sky, pale gray and absolutely steady. His leather cut was worn soft at the shoulders. The patch on his chest said one word, Reaper. Behind him came more. They filed into booths and pulled stools up to the counter. Some of them talked low and easy, the way men do who've spent long hours together on the road. Some of them just sat. None of them made trouble. None of them were loud. They ordered like anyone else, bacon, eggs, toast, coffee, and they said please and thank you with the particular politeness of men who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Emma moved between the tables with her order pad, doing what she did. Smiling, pouring, refilling, keeping her left arm turned slightly inward so the bruise on her wrist stayed in her sleeve. She almost made it through the first round of orders without incident. "Miss." She turned. It was him, the one they'd called Reaper. He was sitting in the booth nearest the window alone, she realized, while his men filled the booths around him, and he was looking at her with those gray eyes, and there was something in the way he looked that made her stomach do something she couldn't immediately name. "Coffee, please," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Quiet. Measured. The voice of a man who chose his words because they cost something. Of course. She reached for the pot. Her sleeve slipped back slightly, just an inch, maybe less, as she poured. She didn't see him notice. She didn't see his jaw tighten or the way his eyes dropped to her wrist for just a fraction of a second before returning to her face. She didn't see any of it. But he saw everything. The man who rode as Reaper had been born Marcus Stone 44 years ago in a town about 60 miles east of Cedar Falls, in a house that had its own language of silence. He'd learned early what it meant when a grown man lowered his voice in a particular way. He'd learned it from watching his mother. And later, much later, in the worst way, he'd learned it again from watching his sister Lena. Lena had been 26 when she died. The official cause documented in 2 lines on a county coroner's report was blunt force trauma. The unofficial cause was 3 years of a relationship that everyone around her could see and nobody said a word about because in the town where they'd grown up, you minded your own business. Because he worked at the sheriff's department. Because Lenta had told Marcus the last time he'd called her 6 days before she died that she was fine, everything was fine, she just needed a little more time. He had believed her. He had given her time. That was the thing he could not stop carrying. Now he sat in this booth in this diner in Cedar Falls, and he watched this young woman with the practiced smile and the careful way she held her left arm, and he felt something move in his chest like something cracking open that he'd thought had turned to stone. He did not look away from his coffee. Not yet. By 9 o'clock, the diner was full. Margaret's didn't have enough tables for all 12 bikers, so 4 of them had pulled chairs up between booths, and everyone had made room with the particular instinct people have around men who don't seem to need much from you except space. Margaret herself, a stout, bright-eyed woman of 62, who had owned the diner for 30 years and seen just about everything Route 9 had to offer, was working the coffee station and watching everything with the quiet attention she'd developed from 3 decades of reading a room. She had noticed Emma's wrist 2 weeks ago. She had said nothing because Emma had looked at her with eyes that said, "Please don't." And Margaret had learned over 62 years to respect that particular look, even when every part of her wanted to push. But she noticed the biker noticing it, and that was different. Derek came out of the kitchen twice during that first hour, unnecessary trips, both of them. The first time he carried a tray of glasses that didn't need carrying and scanned the room with his eyes until he found Emma and tracked her for about 30 seconds before going back. The second time he came all the way out to her side and picked up her order pad from the counter without asking and looked through it, and Emma turned, saw him holding it, and something in her face went carefully, deliberately blank. "You forgot to note the substitution on table 9, Derek said, handing it back. "I didn't forget," Emma said quietly. "I wrote it on the kitchen ticket." "Write it on both." Derek. Emma. One word, that was all. The particular weight of one word with her name in it, said in that register, in that tone. She took the pad back. Okay. Reaper had not moved from his booth. He was still on his first cup of coffee. He was still looking at nothing in particular. But every person in the diner with any sense at all understood that this man was paying extraordinarily close attention to everything happening in this room. Diesel real name, James Rutherford, Reaper's second in command, and the person who knew Marcus Stone better than anyone alive was sitting 2 booths away. He'd watched the whole exchange with Derek and Emma, and then he'd looked over at Reaper, and he'd recognized the particular stillness that had come over his president. Diesel knew that stillness. It wasn't calm. It was the opposite of calm. It was the stillness of a man holding something very heavy, very carefully, because if he put it down wrong, the whole building would shake. He leaned across the aisle. "Hey." Reaper didn't look at him. "Marcus," Diesel kept his voice low. "Tell me you're not. Not what? You know what?" Reaper finally looked at him. "She's got bruising on her left wrist. There's more on her jaw. She covered it, but the light's hitting it wrong. The guy from the kitchen has checked on her twice in 40 minutes without any real reason." He picked up her order pad and looked through it. A pause. "And every time he comes out, she gets smaller." Diesel sat back. He ran a hand over his beard. He looked at Emma, at the practiced brightness of her smile, at the particular economy of her movements, at the way she positioned herself in the room. Then he looked at Derek leaning in the kitchen doorway again, watching. "Marcus," Diesel said again. Carefully. I know, Reaper said. You remember what happened in Tucson when you went off? This isn't Tucson. His voice was completely level. I'm not going off. Then what are you doing? Reaper picked up his coffee cup. Having breakfast, he said, for now. It was at 9:47. Emma would know the exact time later because she looked at the clock on the wall at that precise moment for no particular reason when Derek came fully out of the kitchen and crossed the diner floor. He didn't go to a table. He went to Emma. She was standing at the counter, writing up a ticket, and she looked up when she felt him beside her, that particular awareness she'd developed over 4 years, the way you learn to feel a change in atmospheric pressure. We're out of sausage patties, he said. I told you to check the inventory this morning. I checked it yesterday. We had enough for, well, we don't have enough now. His voice was still low, still controlled. The kitchen noise behind them was cover, and he knew it. You want to explain that? Derek, I checked. I'm not asking what you checked. I'm asking you to explain to me why we don't have what we're supposed to have. He stepped slightly closer. Not enough for anyone across the room to clock it clearly, but enough. Always exactly enough. Or is that too complicated? Emma's jaw tightened. Her hand with the pen in it had gone still on the counter. I'll call the supplier. You should have done that an hour ago. I didn't know until just now that Emma, the weight of her name again. Stop talking. She stopped. The diner had not gone silent. The conversations were still happening. The coffee cups were still clinking. But a particular quality of attention had shifted in the room. Old Harold Briggs had put down his newspaper. Margaret at the coffee station had gone very still. 2 women at a corner table had stopped their conversation mid-sentence. And in the booth nearest the window, Marcus Stone set down his coffee cup with the careful deliberateness of a man making a decision. He stood up. He was not rushing. He wasn't crossing the room in 3 strides, the way anger moves. He was walking the way certainty walks, 1 foot in front of the other, unhurried, absolute. And every eye in the diner followed him across the floor. Derek saw him coming and straightened up. His arms unfolded and refolded. The particular micro-adjustment of a man reassessing who was in the room. Reaper stopped about 4 feet away. He looked at Derek. He said nothing for a moment. Derek filled the silence first because that's what men like Derek do. They fill silences because silence gives the other person too much room. Something I can help you with. Just stretching my legs, Reaper said. Pleasantly, almost. Uh-huh. Derek glanced at Emma, a brief proprietary sweep, then back. Well, we're having a private conversation. I heard that, Reaper said. I was sitting over there. He nodded toward the window booth. Sound carries. Derek's expression shifted just slightly, but enough. Okay. Well, like I said. How's the food been? Reaper asked. To Emma, not to Derek. Directly to Emma, like Derek wasn't standing between them. Everything all right? Any issues? Emma blinked. She was gripping her order pad with both hands. Yes, everything's fine. Good. He held her gaze for just a moment. You've been running all morning. You work hard. It was such a simple thing to say. Such an ordinary, decent, simple thing. And Emma's face did something involuntary. A fractional collapse quickly controlled the expression of someone who hasn't been seen in a very long time and has forgotten what it feels like. Derek saw it. All right. I'd love another coffee when you get a chance, Reaper said, still to Emma, still with that same unhurried directness. No rush. He walked back to his booth. Behind him, he heard Derek say something low and cutting. To Emma heard the kitchen door swing. He sat back down. He picked up his cup. He looked out the window. Diesel was looking at him from 2 booths away. Reaper said nothing. He looked at the parking lot and thought about Lena, and thought about the 6 days he'd waited, and thought about the particular sound a phone makes when a call goes to voicemail, and he made the decision that had been building in his chest since the moment he'd walked through the door. He was not leaving Cedar Falls today. Emma brought him the coffee at 10:15. The diner had thinned out, the breakfast rush fading, a few booths empty now. Some of the bikers had drifted outside to the parking lot, their voices audible through the windows, easy and low. But Reaper was still there, still in the booth, like he had nowhere else to be, which for today was exactly true. She set down the pot and started to turn. Emma, she froze. He hadn't spoken loudly, but her name in his voice was different from her name in Derek's voice. It was different in a way she couldn't have explained, only felt. She turned slowly. He was looking at her with those gray eyes, and he was not smiling exactly, but his face was open in a way that faces in Cedar Falls rarely were. He gestured to the bench across from him. Sit down for a minute. I can't. She glanced toward the kitchen. He went to make a call, Reaper said. I saw him walk out the back. You've got 4 minutes, maybe 5. A pause. Sit down, please. She sat. She didn't know why. She sat. For a moment, he just looked at her, not in a way that was uncomfortable, in a way that was the opposite, which was somehow worse because she didn't know what to do with that. How long, he said. She looked at her hands. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. The silence stretched. A fan turned overhead. Through the window, she could hear the low murmur of the bikers outside, the distant sound of a truck on Route 9. 4 years, she said. She had not planned to say it. It came out like something that had been waiting. How long have you been thinking about leaving? Her throat tightened. It's complicated. I know it's complicated, he said. And the way he said it, not dismissive, not rushing past it, but landing on the word like it was real and specific, and he understood exactly what complicated meant, made something in her chest go very still. Who are you? She asked. Just someone passing through. A beat. Someone who's seen this before. He paused. I had a sister, Lena. She was younger than you actually when it started. She stayed because it was complicated. Because she loved him, because she thought it would get better, because she was afraid of what leaving looked like. His voice had not changed in volume or tone. It remained steady, measured, like a man reading from something written on the inside of his chest. Because nobody said the right words at the right time. Emma was looking at him now. She hadn't meant to. Her eyes had come up on their own. I'm not going to tell you what to do, Reaper said. You're not a child. You don't need a stranger telling you how to live. He leaned forward slightly. But I want you to hear this from someone who has the particular qualification of having failed to say it when it mattered. You don't have to earn the right to be treated like a person. That's not a reward for good behavior. He paused. That's just Tuesday morning. The back door opened. Derek's footsteps crossed the kitchen. Emma stood up so fast she almost knocked over the coffee pot. She grabbed it, righted. It was already moving back toward the counter by the time the kitchen door swung open and Derek came through. He looked at the booth where Reaper was sitting. He looked at Emma at the counter. He looked at the 2 feet of empty space between them and made a calculation that didn't quite add up for him, but that he couldn't quite challenge either. He looked at Reaper. Reaper looked back at him with the particular expression of a man who has already made up his mind about several things and is in no hurry to announce any of them. Derek went back into the kitchen. Emma was gripping the edge of the counter with both hands. She did not look at the booth by the window. But after a moment, when she was sure she was facing away from everyone who might see it, she pressed her lips together very tightly, and her eyes went bright, and she took one slow breath and then another. And in that small, invisible moment, in the space between one breath and the next, something began to shift. By 11 o'clock, word had gotten out. That was the thing about small towns and open windows and parking lots visible from the street. The bikers outside had been talking to some of the locals. Easy, relaxed conversations, the kind that happen when large men sit in the sun with their morning coffee and their guard is down. Tommy Wicks, who pumped gas at the station across the street, had come over twice. Mrs. Delgado from the flower shop 2 doors down had found a reason to walk past with exceptional slowness. And Hector Montoya, who drove the county sheriff's office patrol car and had been parked on the far end of the lot since 9:30 watching the motorcycles with the particular professional interest of a man whose morning had just gotten complicated, had rolled down his window and was now in a conversation with a biker named Patch that had started with "you boys just passing through" and had evolved gradually into something Hector hadn't expected. Inside, Margaret was refilling salt shakers and thinking. She'd been watching Emma all morning. She'd been watching Reaper all morning. She'd been watching Derek. And she'd been doing the math that she'd been doing for 2 weeks, the math that added up to something she didn't want to name but couldn't stop adding. She set down the salt shaker and walked to Reaper's booth. You want anything else? She asked. Just that, just a question. Reaper looked up at her. He looked at her the way he'd looked at Emma, that direct, unhurried, particular attention. You own this place. 30 years, Margaret said. Good food. Thank you. She didn't move. She's a good girl. I can see that. Been working for me 3 years. A pause. Her mother used to come in. Nice woman. Moved to Arizona last year, some trouble with her hip. Margaret was looking at the counter at Emma moving behind it. Emma's been on her own since. She's not on her own, Reaper said. Margaret looked at him. What does that mean? He met her eyes. It means she's not on her own. He let the words sit exactly where he'd put them. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away. She picked up a menu from the table that didn't need picking up, and she said very quietly and without looking at him, "He's got a temper, worse when there aren't witnesses." Reaper said nothing. "I've tried to talk to her. She shuts down." Margaret's voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. "I don't know what else I can do." "You've done it," Reaper said. "You stayed near her. That matters more than you think." Margaret pressed her lips together. She nodded once, a short, private nod, the kind you give when someone says something that confirms what you've hoped was true. She walked back to the counter. At 11:20, Diesel came inside from the parking lot. He slid into the booth across from Reaper and folded his large hands on the table and said without preamble, "What are we doing? We're having breakfast." "Breakfast ended an hour ago." Reaper said nothing. "The guys are fine," Diesel said. "Nobody's going anywhere. I already told them." He paused. "But Marcus, tell me you have a plan that doesn't end with us in a county lockup." "Have you ever seen me lose control?" "Tucson. I didn't lose control in Tucson. I just moved faster than planned." The man's nose was already broken when we got there. Diesel stared at him. "That is not—" He stopped. He exhaled. "Okay, fine. What's the plan that doesn't involve noses?" Reaper looked out to the window at the parking lot, at the 12 motorcycles sitting in the July sun, at the 11 men who had ridden with him for years through situations that had no clean answers. He thought about Lena. He thought about the 6 days. He thought about the weight of the word complicated and the particular price of doing nothing in the name of letting someone else live their own life. "We wait," he said. "We watch. And when the moment comes," he paused, "we stand up." Diesel considered this. "That's it. Sometimes that's everything." Diesel was quiet for a moment. Then, "She know what you're planning?" "She doesn't need to know yet." He looked at his second. "But Margaret does, and Margaret's got a phone call to make." He slid a small piece of paper across the table, a number written in a firm, clear hand. "There's a shelter in Mason County. Good one. I know the woman who runs it." Diesel picked up the paper and looked at it. He looked at Reaper. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe? Respect. "All right," he said quietly. "All right." The kitchen door swung open again, and Derek came through it, and the temperature in the room changed the way it always changed when he was in it, subtly, imperceptibly, but unmistakably. Emma looked up from the counter. Her shoulders, which had been marginally lower than usual in the last hour, came back up. Diesel watched it happen. He looked at Reaper. Reaper was already watching. "How does a man get to a place where that's the only way he knows how to feel big?" Diesel said quietly. "He learns it somewhere," Reaper said, "and nobody ever showed him different." "You feel sorry for him?" "No." The word was flat and immediate. "But I understand the mechanism." He paused. "Understanding it doesn't change what has to happen." Derek was talking to Emma again, pointing at something, a ticket, a table, hard to tell. Emma was nodding. Her face had its careful, blank quality again, the quality of someone managing something that requires management. When Diesel said, "Soon," Reaper said, "he'll push too far. They always do." He picked up his coffee cup. "And when he does," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The 11 men in the booths around him, some talking, some quiet, some reading the paper, had come through enough together to understand the particular quality of their president's stillness. One by one, with no announcement, in no signal, they stopped talking. They set down their cups. They sat up slightly. They were ready. Whatever happened next in Margaret's diner on the corner of Route 9 and Elm in Cedar Falls on this bright Tuesday morning in July, whatever happened next was going to happen with 12 men standing behind it. And Derek in the kitchen doorway had no idea. Emma didn't either, not yet. But Margaret at the coffee station had already taken out her phone and was looking at the number Diesel had left on the table, and her eyes were wet and she was dialing. And outside on Route 9, the sun was climbing and the motorcycles were gleaming in the heat, And Cedar Falls, which had learned over many quiet years to mind its own business, was about 45 minutes away from learning something entirely different. Margaret made the call from the supply closet. She stood between the extra rolls of paper towels and the industrial-sized cans of tomato soup, and she pressed the phone to her ear, and she waited, and when the woman on the other end picked up and said, "Mason County Women's Resource Center, how can I help you?" Margaret's voice came out smaller than she intended. "My name is Margaret Calloway. I own a diner in Cedar Falls." She stopped, started again. "I have a young woman. She works for me. I think she's been—" The words sat in her throat like something she couldn't quite swallow. "She needs help, real help, not a pamphlet." The woman on the other end didn't rush her. "Can you tell me a little about the situation?" "He works here too," Margaret said. "That's the problem. I can't just send her somewhere while he's 20 feet away in my kitchen." Her voice dropped further. "And I'm not sure she'll go. That's the other problem." "It usually is," the woman said, not unkindly. "Is she safe right now?" "There are 12 Hell's Angels in my dining room," Margaret said. "So, relatively speaking, yes." A pause. "I'm sorry, did you say—" "Their leader. He noticed. He's the one who gave me your number." Margaret pressed her back against the shelf. "He seems to know what he's doing." Another pause, longer this time. "All right, Mrs. Calloway, let me tell you what we can do." Margaret listened. She nodded even though the woman couldn't see her. When she came back out into the diner 3 minutes later, her eyes were dry and her spine was straight, and she had a plan in her pocket for the first time in 2 weeks. She looked at Reaper across the room. He raised his eyebrows slightly, a question. She gave him a small nod. Done. He looked back at his coffee. The moment that broke the morning open came at 11:53. Emma had table 2 a couple she didn't know passing through who'd ordered the club sandwich and a side salad, and she was carrying their plates from the kitchen's pass-through when Derek stepped into her path. Not quite blocking her, not quite, but in that particular way of his taking up space, she needed making her rear out, making her wait. "Table 7's been waiting for their check," he said. "I'll get it after I drop." "I said they've been waiting." "Derek," she kept her voice low, steady, the practiced voice. "I have hot plates in my hands." "Then you should move faster." She went around him. She delivered the plates. She smiled at the couple and said she hoped everything was perfect. And they smiled back and said it looked wonderful. And Emma went to the register for table 7's check, and Derek watched her the entire time from the kitchen doorway, and not a single person in the diner who was watching all of this happen said a word, except that wasn't quite true anymore. Hector. Diesel had walked outside at some point and was now crouched by the patrol car window, talking to the deputy sheriff who'd been parked there for an hour and a half. "I'm going to ask you something straight." Hector Montoya was 41 years old. He'd been in law enforcement for 16 years. He'd also grown up 3 streets over from Margaret's diner, and he'd known Emma Reyes since she was in 8th grade, and he had driven past this building every single day for 2 years, and he knew, and the knowing had lived in his chest like a stone he'd decided not to lift. "Go ahead," Hector said. "Has anyone filed anything?" Diesel asked. "Any reports? Any calls?" Hector's jaw moved. "I can't discuss." "I'm not asking you to testify," Diesel said. "I'm asking you man to man if there's anything on paper." Hector looked at the diner window. He could see Emma through it, moving between the tables. He could see Derek in the kitchen doorway. "No," he said finally. "Nothing on paper." "She ever call?" Hector said nothing, which was an answer. "Hector." Diesel put one hand on the roof of the patrol car. "If something happens in there today, nothing illegal, nobody gets hurt, are you going to be a problem?" Hector Montoya looked at him for a long time. "I'm going to sit right here," he said, "and drink my coffee." He held up his travel mug. "I have a lot of coffee." Diesel stood up. "Good man." He walked back inside. At 12:10, one of the younger bikers, a 28-year-old named Cody, who'd been with the club 4 years and who had the particular quality of someone who'd been angry for a long time and was still learning what to do with it, leaned across the table toward Reaper. "Boss," he said, "how long are we going to sit here? You have somewhere to be." "No, but—" Cody glanced toward the kitchen. He came out and grabbed her arm. 20 minutes ago, when she walked by. You didn't see it. I saw it. "So why are we—" "Because she didn't fall," Reaper said. Because she caught herself and kept moving. Because if I stand up every time he makes a move, all I'm doing is making her the center of a scene she didn't ask for. He looked at Cody evenly. This isn't about what I want to do. It's about what she needs. Cody sat back. He was quiet for a moment. That's harder, he said. Yes, Reaper said. It is. The kitchen door swung open and Derek came all the way out this time. Not a partial trip, not a check. He crossed the full width of the diner to where Emma was standing at the far booth clearing plates, and he got close, too close inside her space in the particular way that has no innocent explanation, and his voice was low enough that the words didn't carry, but the register did. Emma's hand stopped on the plate she was holding. Whatever he said lasted about 15 seconds. Emma stood completely still for all of it. Then she picked up the plates and she walked past him to the kitchen pass-through, and she set the plates down with a sound that was just slightly harder than necessary, and she pressed both hands flat on the counter for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, and then she went back to work. Reaper was already standing. Not rushing, not aggressive, but standing and moving, and this time he didn't go toward Derek. He went toward Emma. She looked up and saw him coming, and something flickered in her face, alarm maybe, or something close to it, and he stopped about 6 feet from her, and he said very quietly, "Do you want to take a 5-minute break?" She blinked. "I can't, there are tables." "Margaret?" He said it over his shoulder, not loudly. Margaret was already there. "I've got them, honey. Go." She had her hand on Emma's shoulder. "Go." Emma looked from Margaret to Reaper and back to Margaret, and something in her face went through about 4 different things in 3 seconds, and then she said, "Okay, 5 minutes." She went through the side door to the small back patio where the staff kept a folding chair and a half-dead plant that Emma watered when she remembered. Reaper followed her out. Derek, coming back from the far booth, saw the side door close behind them. He stopped. His face changed. Margaret was in front of him before he'd taken a step. Not blocking him, she was 62 and 5'4", and she wasn't foolish about the geometry of that. But she was there with her coffee pot and her 30 years of ownership and the particular moral authority of a woman who has decided she is done being quiet. "I need you in the kitchen," she said. "The lunch orders are backing up." Emma just walked out with a customer. She's on a 5-minute break, which she is entitled to, per the labor code of this state, which I know because I've operated this establishment for 30 years, and I have never once, not once, had a violation. She held his gaze. "Kitchen, please." Derek stared at her. His jaw was working. "Margaret, now Derek." He went, but his eyes went to the side door first, and what was in them was not something Margaret wanted to spend time looking at directly. She turned away. She topped off Harold Briggs's decaf, even though he hadn't asked for it. Her hand was completely steady. Her heart was not. On the back patio, Emma sat in the folding chair, and Reaper stood, and neither of them said anything for the first 30 seconds, which was its own kind of conversation. "He saw us come out here," Emma said finally. "I know. He's going to, She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Going to what?" Reaper asked. Not pushing, just asking. She shook her head. "You don't understand how this works. Walk me through it." Emma looked up at him. Why does it matter to you? You don't know me. You wrote in here this morning, you don't know anything about my life or what I've tried to do, or..." Her voice was climbing and she caught it, pulled it back down a practice motion. "I'm sorry, I'm not..." She exhaled. "I'm not trying to be rude." "You're not being rude, you're being honest." He sat down on the concrete step across from her, brought himself down to her level, which she noticed. "And you're right, I don't know your life, but I know this morning, and I know what I've watched for the last 4 hours. 4 hours, Emma said. "You've been here 4 hours. Good coffee." A beat. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but in the neighborhood. "Emma," his voice shifted, still quiet but more direct. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think about it, not react to it. Can you do that?" She looked at him, nodded. "What are you afraid would happen, the actual worst thing, if you left?" The word landed in the space between them, and Emma did not look away from it. She sat with it for a moment. The fan inside hummed through the wall. Somewhere on Route 9, a truck shifted gears. "He'd find me," she said. "He knows everyone here. He knows where my mother lives. He has my location is on his phone." She said it matter-of-factly without drama the way you describe geography, but last time I tried 18 months ago, he showed up at my friend Carla's house at 2 in the morning. Just showed up, just rang the doorbell. He didn't do anything. He didn't say anything threatening. He just rang the doorbell, and when she opened it, he said he was looking for his girlfriend, and his voice was completely normal. And Carla, Emma stopped. Carla hasn't talked to me since. She said she didn't want the trouble. Reaper listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer anything while she was still talking. So I came back, Emma said, because I didn't have anywhere else to go, and because I thought if I was just careful enough, if I was just, she stopped. I know how that sounds. It sounds like someone who tried and didn't get enough help, Reaper said. That's not the same as something being wrong with you. Emma looked at her hands. Margaret told you to say that. Nobody tells me to say anything. She almost smiled again. Almost. Who are you really? He was quiet for a moment. A man who had a sister, he said, who told her she could leave when she was ready, who gave her time. The concrete step was hard under him. He didn't shift. She wasn't ready fast enough. The air between them went very quiet. Emma looked at him. Really looked at him, the kind of look that takes in the scar along his jaw and the lines at the corners of his eyes, in the particular way grief sits on a person's face when they've carried it long enough to stop trying to hide it. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Me too. He looked back at her. Every single day. A beat. That's why I'm still sitting in your diner at noon instead of being in Columbus like I was supposed to be. You were supposed to be in Columbus. We had a meeting. He paused. They can have it without me. Emma's eyes went bright suddenly. She looked away. She did the thing she'd done inside, that controlled breath, that deliberate blinking. You don't even know me. I know enough. Enough for what? Enough to stay, he said simply. The side door opened. They both looked up. It was Margaret. Her face was composed, but her eyes said something was happening. Emma, honey, you should come back in. Something in her tone made Emma stand up immediately. What happened? Nothing yet, Margaret said, but Derek's on the phone with someone. He's been on it for 5 minutes and he keeps looking at that door. Emma's face changed. The openness that had been there, fragile and brief as a soap bubble, closed back down. Her spine straightened. Her chin came up. And the careful, managed version of Emma Reyes who'd walked into the diner that morning at 7 a.m. was back, locked in place, armored. Reaper saw it happen and felt it like a fist in his sternum. Emma, he said. She looked at him. The number Margaret has, he said. Mason County, will you call it? She looked at him for a long moment. Something was working behind her eyes. Not calculation, but something deeper. The terrible, exhausting, real arithmetic of a person trying to measure fear against the cost of staying afraid. I don't know, she said. It was the most honest thing she'd said all day, and they both understood that. She went inside. Reaper stood on the patio for a moment alone. He tilted his head back. He breathed. He thought about Lena one more time, let himself think about her the way he rarely allowed himself to, directly and without flinching, and then he put it back where he kept it, and he opened the door and walked into the diner. So, what happened next happened fast. Derek was off his phone. He was standing in the middle of the floor, not the kitchen, not the doorway, the middle of the dining room, and he was watching Reaper come through the side door with an expression that had dropped his public face completely. This was the private face. Emma knew this face. Her body registered it before her mind caught up a particular automatic alertness that had been trained into her over 4 years the way you train a reflex. You need to leave, Derek said. Tom. To Reaper, directly, loud enough that the whole room heard it. The diner went quiet, really quiet, the deep quiet of a room full of people who have all simultaneously made the decision to hold very still. Reaper stopped. He tilted his head slightly. Is that right? You've been in here 4 hours. You've been talking to my girlfriend. I don't know who you think you are, but this is a place of business and you are making people uncomfortable. Derek's voice was controlled, but something underneath it wasn't. He'd rehearsed this. Reaper realized the speech. He'd been rehearsing it on the phone. Who were you talking to? Reaper said. Derek blinked. What? On the phone, just now, 5 minutes. He said it without accusation, like he was just filling in information. Who did you call? Something shifted in Derek's face, quickly covered. My brother, Derek said. Reaper looked at him. Your brother's coming? I think you should leave before it matters. I see. Reaper nodded slowly. So you called someone to come down here because you're having trouble with a customer who's been sitting in a booth ordering coffee. He looked around the room at Margaret, at the couple at table 2, at Harold Briggs, at the 2 women in the corner who had not moved in 40 minutes. Does that seem right to everybody? Am I reading that correctly? Nobody said anything, but nobody disagreed either. Cody in his booth had his hands flat on the table and his eyes on Reaper. Diesel was perfectly still. The other 10 men, spread through the diner, coffee cups down, newspapers folded, were watching with the collective attention of a group that had learned long ago how to be very ready without looking like it. Derek looked around the room and saw them all looking back at him, and something in his posture faltered. Emma, he said. He turned to her. The shift was immediate from confronting Reaper to addressing her as if that was easier ground. Tell him we're fine and he can go. Emma was standing at the counter. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at Derek, and she was not using her public face, and she was not performing anything. She was just standing there looking at him, and the silence stretched. Emma, his voice dropped. The private register, the one that wasn't for the room. Tell him. Reaper did not move. He did not speak. He stood between Derek and the door, and he waited. Emma's eyes moved from Derek to Reaper, then to Margaret, then to the room full of people who had stopped looking away, then back to Derek. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it was the most steady it had been all morning. I don't want you to call your brother, she said. Derek's face went through something. I don't want you to call anyone, Emma said. Her voice was still low, still controlled, but the quality had changed. There was something underneath it now, something that had been pushed down for a long time and was pressing up. I want you to stop. I want you to stop the way you talk to me and the way you look at me and the way you, She stopped, swallowed. I'm tired, Derek. I am so tired. The room was so quiet you could hear the ceiling fans. Derek stared at her, and then his face did the thing Reaper had seen it do all morning. It contracted, went tight, went toward the language he knew, the only language that had ever worked for him. You are not doing this right now, Derek said. Not in front of... She said she's tired, Reaper said. The words landed like something dropped on the floor. Derek turned back to him. She's talking to me, Derek said. She was, Reaper agreed. Now I'm talking to you. He took one step forward, just one. And I'm going to say one thing. He looked at Derek with those gray eyes, and this close, the depth of them was something Derek hadn't counted on. She's tired, and everyone in this room heard her say it. And everyone in this room has been watching this morning, and what they've seen, he let a beat go by, is not something any of them are going to forget. Derek looked around the room again, and this time what looked back at him was different. It wasn't just 12 bikers. It was Harold Briggs, who'd put down his newspaper and was looking at him with the expression of a man who'd lived long enough to know shame when he saw it. It was the couple at table 2, the woman with her hand on her husband's arm. It was the 2 women in the corner, both of them looking at Derek with a clarity that had no softness in it. It was Margaret standing at the counter with her hands folded, her 30 years of ownership gathered around her like a thing you could feel. Derek had counted on the room staying quiet. The room staying quiet was the whole system. The room had always stayed quiet. The room was not quiet anymore. And outside through the diner window, 3 more motorcycles had just pulled into the lot. Then 4 more. Then as Derek watched as his face went from red to something closer to pale, a whole line of them rolling in 2 by 2 off Route 9, filling the lot of engines, dropping to silence one by one. Cody had texted someone 20 minutes ago before Reaper had gone to the patio. Just 3 words need the chapter. And now here they were. Because that was the thing about brothers, not the kind Derek had called, but the real kind. They came when you needed them without asking why. Derek counted. His lips were moving slightly. How many? He started. 32, Diesel said helpfully from his booth. 35 with the ones already here. He smiled. It was a very calm smile. We heard there was good coffee. Derek looked at Reaper. For the first time all morning, the private face was completely gone. What was underneath it was something smaller. Something that had relied on doors staying closed, and mouths staying shut, and rooms staying quiet, and that without any of those things had nothing left to stand on. Emma, Derek said, one last time, but it came out different now. Not the weighted proprietary version. Something thinner, almost a question. Emma looked at him, and the tired she'd described, the 4-year bone-deep tired, was fully visible in her face now, unhidden, and she let him see it. "Go home, Derek," she said. He stood there for 5 more seconds, then 7. Then the bell above the door rang with its familiar third-hinge squeak, and Derek walked through it, and the door closed behind him. And for one long moment, absolutely nobody in Margaret's diner made a sound. And then Harold Briggs said very quietly to no one in particular, "Well, it's about time." Margaret laughed, a short, tight sound, something between relief and tears. One of the women in the corner was pressing her fingers to her mouth. The couple at table 2 were looking at each other with the private expressions of people who'd witnessed something they hadn't expected on a Tuesday. Emma stood at the counter with her hands at her sides. Reaper looked at her across the room. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Something in her face said it, not gratitude exactly, which was too small, but something larger and older and harder to name. The particular expression of a person who has been underwater for a very long time and has just broken the surface and is trying to remember what air tastes like. Reaper nodded at her. Once, small, just enough. Then Diesel's phone rang and Reaper's phone rang 3 seconds later, and outside in the parking lot, 35 motorcycles were gleaming in the midday sun, and Derek's car was pulling out of the far end of the lot faster than necessary, the speed of a man who has lost the room and knows it. But he hadn't called his brother for company. He'd called his brother because his brother was a cop. And the patrol car that turned off Route 9 into the parking lot 4 minutes later was not Hector Montoya's. It was someone else entirely. And the expression on his face when he stepped out and looked at 35 motorcycles was not the expression of a man who was here to keep the peace. It was the expression of a man who'd already decided how this story was going to end. He put his hand on his radio. He looked at Reaper through the diner window, and Reaper looked back at him. And everything that had just been won. The room, the silence broke, and Emma's 3 words spoken out loud balanced suddenly on a very narrow edge. The officer's name was Ray Briley. He was Derek's brother's partner, not his brother as it turned out, but close enough. 14 years on the Cedar Falls PD. The last 4 of them spent learning that certain families in certain towns had a particular kind of insurance that came with a badge and a radio and the legal authority to make your morning very complicated. He stepped into the diner and the bell rang, and 35 bikers did not move. They didn't need to. Their stillness was its own statement, the collective unhurried stillness of men who had been in complicated rooms before and had learned that the first person to move fast usually loses. Reaper was already at the counter. He'd crossed the room in the 30 seconds it had taken Briley to get from his car to the door, and now he was standing there with his hands visible and his posture open and his expression the particular neutral of a man who has decided to be very, very careful. "Morning," Reaper said. Briley looked at him, looked at the room, did the math of 35 leather vests, and came up with a number that made his jaw tighten. "I'm going to need everyone to remain calm." "We're calm," Diesel said from his booth. He picked up his coffee cup to demonstrate. "Extremely calm." Briley ignored him. He was looking at Reaper. "I received a report of a disturbance." "From Derek Marsh," Reaper said, a beat. "From a concerned citizen." "Who is Derek Marsh?" Reaper said again. Not a question. "Who works in that kitchen? Who just left this parking lot doing about 50 in a 30 zone, which you may want to note for your report?" He tilted his head slightly. "Concerned citizen." Briley's jaw moved. He looked around the room again at Margaret, at the regular customers who were watching him with varying degrees of expression, at Harold Briggs, who had the particular look of a man who has known this officer since he was in Little League and was currently deeply unimpressed. "Anyone want to tell me what happened here?" Briley said. To the room. Harold Briggs put down his coffee cup. "Derek Marsh was harassing his girlfriend all morning," he said clearly in the direct voice of a 73-year-old man who has decided he is too old to be quiet. "Been watching it for years. These gentlemen." He nodded at the bikers with the careful dignity of someone making a formal introduction. "They said something. He left." Harold picked his cup back up. "That's what happened." Briley looked at Harold. Something moved across his face, a recognition, a slight recalibration. You couldn't easily dismiss Harold Briggs. Harold had been on the Cedar Falls Town Council for 11 years. His wife taught Sunday school. He was in the particular social mathematics of a small town, not a person you wanted openly contradicting you. Ma'am, Briley said to Emma, are you all right? Emma was standing 2 feet from Reaper. She had her order pad in her hand. She'd picked it up reflexively, the way you grab something familiar when the ground shifts, and she was looking at Briley with an expression that had several layers to it, none of which were simple. I'm fine, she said. Has anyone touched you? Threatened you? Derek left when she said, I asked him to. Briley looked at her steadily. Derek says these men intimidated him, wouldn't let him conduct business in his own workplace. This isn't his workplace, Margaret said from the coffee station. Her voice was perfectly level. This is my workplace. I own this building, this business, and every stick of furniture in it. Derek Marsh is a kitchen employee, was a kitchen employee. She paused to let that land. As of approximately 11:45 this morning, he is no longer employed here. The room absorbed this. Briley absorbed it. You fired him, Briley said. I exercise my right as an employer, Margaret said. Yes. On what grounds? Margaret looked at him the way a woman of 62 looks at a man who is testing her patience inside her own establishment. Conduct unbecoming, she said, which is as specific as I'm required to be. Briley looked from Margaret to Reaper. Something was working behind his eyes. The calculation of a man who'd arrived expecting a clear situation and was finding it considerably less clear than advertised. Derek had called this in as a biker gang threatening staff. What he'd walked into was Harold Briggs, a 30-year business owner, in a room full of witnesses. I'm going to need your ID, Briley said to Reaper, and the IDs of your... Of course, Reaper said. He reached into his vest slowly, deliberately, the particular slowness of a man who understands exactly how quickly a hand in a vest can be misread, and produced his wallet. He laid his license on the counter. Briley picked it up. Read it. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Marcus Stone, he said. That's right. Cedar Falls is a long way from your registered address, Mr. Stone. We were passing through, Reaper said. Good coffee. We stayed for breakfast. He paused, and then a little longer. Briley set the license back on the counter. He looked at Emma again. She was still holding her order pad. She was looking back at him with those steady eyes, and behind the steadiness, Briley could see something that he recognized. He'd been in enough domestics to recognize it, the particular exhausted alertness of someone managing a situation in real time. Emma, he said, and his voice to his credit dropped slightly, something human coming through the professional. I've known you since you were in high school. I'm going to ask you directly, not for a report, just are you okay? Emma's mouth opened, closed. The question was real, and she knew it was real, and that was almost worse than if it hadn't been. No, she said, not really, not for a while. She looked at him steadily, but I'm working on it. Briley stood with that for a moment. He looked at his shoes. He looked at the license on the counter. He picked it up and handed it back to Reaper. There's nothing for me to act on, he said quietly. No crime's been committed. No one's been physically threatened. He said it to the room, but he said it as a man stating facts, not as a man who was happy about them. He looked at Reaper. I'm going to ask you to keep your men calm. They're the calmest men in Cedar Falls, Reaper said. Briley almost smiled. Almost. I'll be in the lot, he said, and if anything changes. Appreciated, Reaper said. Briley went back through the door. The bell rang its familiar third hinge squeak. Through the window, they could all see him stop on the steps, take a breath, and take out his phone, not his radio, his personal phone, and stand there for a moment looking at it. Diesel appeared at Reaper's elbow. He's calling Derek, Diesel said. Probably. Should we be worried? About what? Diesel looked at him. I don't know. Reinforcements? Some kind of Diesel. Reaper picked up his license and put it back in his wallet. Derek lost the room. Everything he does from here is reaction. Reaction is noise. He looked out the window at Briley's back. Noise doesn't scare me. But then Briley turned around. He came back through the door, the bell, again the squeak, and he looked directly at Emma, and his face had changed. Whatever the phone call had been, it had changed something in him. Emma, he said, Derek is at your apartment. The room went very still. Emma's face went white. What? He called me from there. He's not threatening anything. He says he's getting his things, but he also said... Briley stopped. He seemed to be choosing words carefully. He mentioned your cat. Emma's order pad hit the floor. Biscuit, she said. He wouldn't... I don't know what he would or wouldn't do, Briley said. and the honesty in it was sharp. I'm telling you what he said. Emma was already moving. Reaper was faster. He put himself between her and the door, not blocking her, but there present, immediate. You are not going over there alone. That's my apartment. I know. He held her gaze. Take Margaret. I'm coming, Margaret said immediately. She had her purse off the hook behind the counter before the sentence was finished. Take Diesel, Reaper said. Hey, Diesel started. Go with them, Reaper said, and the two words had a particular quality that ended the conversation. Emma looked at Reaper. Her eyes were scared now, fully scared, the careful management stripped away by the specific fear of a specific living thing in a specific place. He knows I love that cat more than... She stopped. He knows. I know, Reaper said. Go, we'll be right behind you. She went. Margaret went. Diesel went. Briley, after a moment's visible internal deliberation, got in his patrol car. Reaper turned to the room, or to his men. Cody, you're here. Keep the place clear. He looked at the four men nearest the door. With me. Woodin. The apartment was 6 blocks from the diner. Emma's building was a 2-story walk-up on Crescent Street. 12 units, 1 parking lot, a landlord who fixed things eventually, and asked no questions as a matter of policy. Derek's truck was in the lot when they pulled up, engine off. He'd been there a while. Emma was out of Margaret's car before it stopped fully and was up the outside stairs in 8 steps and through the door of Unit 7, and Diesel was behind her, and behind Diesel was Margaret. And by the time Reaper came up the stairs, he could already hear the voices. He stopped in the doorway. Derek was standing in the middle of Emma's living room. He was holding the cat, a large orange tabby, regarding the situation with the imperious calm of an animal that has survived many human dramas. And the way he was holding it was not violent, but it was deliberate, pointed. The way you hold something that belongs to someone else when you want them to understand that belonging is not guaranteed. Emma stood 6 feet from him. Her voice was controlled, but her hands were not. Put him down, Derek. I'm just holding him, Derek said. Relax. Put him down. I wanted to talk to you. He looked at Diesel, at Margaret, at Reaper in the doorway with the expression of a man who'd planned for a private conversation and received an audience. His jaw tightened. Alone. That's not happening, Diesel said. This is my apartment, Emma said. You don't live here. You haven't lived here for 6 months, and I want you to put my cat down and get out. Something moved across Derek's face. The system, the whole architecture of managed control and low voices and pointed silences was failing him in real time, and what was underneath it was not something he'd planned for anyone to see. It was something rawer, something that in a different life with different choices might have been grief. I'm not trying to hurt anything, Derek said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word. He stopped. I don't know what you think I am, Emma. I don't know what you've told these people. She didn't have to tell them anything, Margaret said from behind Diesel. They have eyes. Derek looked at her, then at Reaper. He looked at Reaper for a long time. You think you helped her, Derek said. Coming in there with your 50 guys. 35, Diesel said. Making a whole scene, making her feel like she needs... He stopped. His voice was doing something unsteady now. The cat was still in his arms, still placid tail moving slowly. I love her. I know you don't believe that. I know what this looks like. But I love her. The room absorbed this. Reaper stepped inside. He didn't go far, just enough to not be in the doorway. He looked at Derek with the steady gray eyes and he spoke quietly. I believe you, he said. Derek blinked. He hadn't expected that. I believe you think you love her, Reaper said. And I believe it feels real to you. And I believe that makes this harder, not easier. He paused. But love that leaves bruises isn't love. It's need wearing love's clothes, and the difference matters a great deal. He held Derek's gaze. You know the difference, even part of you knows. That's why you're standing here holding her cat instead of being able to look her in the eye. The silence was absolute. Derek looked down at the cat. His throat moved. He set the cat down gently on the floor, and Biscuit walked immediately and with great dignity to Emma and sat on her feet. Emma reached down and picked him up. She pressed her face into his fur for 1 second, 2, and her shoulders shook once, just once, and then she straightened. I want you to leave, she said, and I don't want you to come back. Derek stood there. He looked at her, really looked the way people rarely do when they're afraid of what looking might require of them. And then something in him sagged. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was quieter than that, the particular deflation of a man whose bluff has been called by someone who knows all his cards. He walked to the door. He stopped next to Reaper. He was a full head shorter, Reaper realized, or maybe he'd just been smaller this whole time, and it hadn't been visible until now. "If I go," Derek said very quietly, "she's alone." "No," Reaper said. "She's not." Derek looked at him, looked at Margaret, looked at Emma, who was standing in her own apartment holding her own cat, with the particular posture of a woman who has just made a decision so large she can feel it in her bones. He walked through the door. Briley, waiting in the lot below, straightened when he saw him come down the stairs. They exchanged a look, the look of two men who had both just witnessed something that was going to require some internal reorganization. And Briley said something quiet, and Derek nodded and got in his truck and drove away. Nobody in the apartment said anything for a long moment. Then Margaret said, "I'll make tea." Even though Emma's kitchen was small and Margaret didn't know where anything was because it was the kind of thing you say when you need something real to do. Emma sat down on her couch with Biscuit and looked at Reaper in the doorway. "You said I wasn't alone," she said. "You're not. You live in where do you live?" "Columbus, mostly. That's 4 hours from here." "It is," he agreed. She looked at him. "So what does that mean?" "Not alone, what does that actually mean in practice?" It was a fair question. It was the most practical question anyone had asked all day, and it deserved a real answer. Reaper came into the room and sat in the chair across from the couch. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "It means Margaret has a number," he said. "It means the shelter in Mason County has a room if you want it tonight or next week or next month, your timeline, your choice. It means I know people in Cedar Falls who will check on you." He paused. "And it means that for the foreseeable future, Derek Marsh is aware that you are not without people," which changes his math considerably. Emma was quiet. Biscuit purred against her chest. "And you?" she said. "You personally." He met her eyes. "I'll answer when you call," he said, "whatever time it is." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the window. At the afternoon light coming through it, a different quality of light than this morning, softer the day having turned without her quite noticing. "I want to call the shelter," she said. "Not to go tonight. I need to think, but I want to hear what they say." "Margaret has the number," he said immediately. "I know." She pulled her phone out of her apron pocket. "I already texted her." He almost smiled. "You already texted her?" While Derek was talking, she looked down at the phone. Seemed like a good time. And there it was, the thing that had been underneath all of it, under the 4 years and the careful management and the practiced smile and the bruises she'd learned to cover. Emma Reyes had been making calculations and exit routes and contingency plans the entire time. She hadn't been broken. She'd been waiting for the right moment, for the right people in the room. Reaper understood this in a way that settled something in his chest, something he'd been bracing against since the morning, since the window, since the wrist. She wasn't Lena. She was going to, okay. The thought moved through him like something physical, like blood returning to a limb that's been numb. "There's something else," Emma said. He waited. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. He opened it. It was a printout weeks old, he could tell by the creases, from a legal aid website. Restraining orders. The requirements, the process, the timeline. It had been annotated in pen, small, careful handwriting, specific questions circled. He looked up at her. "I've been doing research," Emma said. "For a while. She exhaled. "I couldn't figure out how to do it without him knowing before I was ready. His brother's partner is a cop. Half this town knows him. I had no idea how to—" "Hector Montoya," Reaper said. She blinked. "What?" "Hector Montoya, the deputy sheriff who's been parked outside the diner since 9:30 this morning." Reaper folded the paper back and handed it to her. "He's been in Cedar Falls his whole life. He has no particular affection for Derek Marsh, and I think—" He paused. "I think he's been waiting for someone to make this easy for him to do the right thing." Emma stared at him. "You talked to Hector." "Diesel did." "About me?" "About the situation." He looked at her carefully. "Is that okay?" She considered it. "Yes," she said. "Yeah, that's yes." She looked down at the paper in her hands. You've been working on this all morning. We had good coffee. This time she actually laughed. A short, slightly broken sound, but real completely. Real, the laugh of a person who hasn't had much occasion for it and has forgotten how it feels in the lungs. Margaret appeared from the kitchen with 2 mugs and an expression of determined practicality. I found the tea. It's chamomile. She set the mugs down. She looked at Emma. She put her hand on the side of Emma's face, gentle, brief, completely maternal, and Emma's eyes went bright, and she didn't look away. Okay, Margaret said. It was an entire paragraph in one word. Okay, Emma agreed. Outside, the afternoon had fully settled in. Down the block on Route 9, you could hear motorcycles not moving, just idling, the particular low rumble of engines that are present and unhurried and not going anywhere yet. Reaper's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from Cody back at the diner. Briley just came back in. Wants to talk to you. Says it's not official. He typed back, on my way. He stood up. Emma looked at him. Hector, she guessed. Probably. He paused at the door. I want you to do one thing today. What? Call the number, Ducky said. Just call it. You don't have to decide anything. You don't have to go anywhere. Just let someone tell you what's possible. Emma looked at her phone, at the screen still open to Margaret's text with the number in it. Okay, she said. He nodded. He went through the door and down the stairs, and when he came out into the afternoon and walked to where his bike was parked, he could feel, not just know, but physically feel, the particular shift in weight that comes when something that's been wrong for a long time begins slowly at the edges to move toward right. It wasn't over. He knew that. Derek's truck was gone, but Derek was still Derek, and Cedar Falls was still a small town, and the road from I want to leave to I have left was long and full of places where courage could fail and support could vanish, and the familiar gravity of a known life could pull you back in. But Emma had a phone with a number on the screen. She had Margaret. She had Hector Montoya, who'd been drinking coffee in a parking lot all morning, waiting to do the right thing. She had 35 men on motorcycles who'd rerouted their Tuesday for a stranger, and she had a restraining order printout that she'd been carrying in her apron for weeks with questions already circled in careful, deliberate handwriting. She'd been planning this. She just hadn't had enough people standing behind her to believe the plan could work. Now she did. Reaper got on his bike. He started it. The engine settled into that low rolling sound that meant movement, direction, purpose. His phone buzzed again. Cody Briley says Hector wants to formally take the case. He's ready to file if Emma will sign. Reaper read it twice. He sat with it for a moment. Then he texted back, tell him give her an hour. She's making a call. He put the phone in his pocket. He sat on his bike in the afternoon sun, and he thought about Lena one more time. The last time today, he promised himself, though he never quite kept that promise. And he thought about the 6 days and the phone going to voicemail and the 2 lines in a county coroner's report. Then he rode back to the diner. Behind him, up in Unit 7 on Crescent Street, a phone rang. Emma looked at the screen, Mason County Women's Resource Center, and she had not dialed it yet because she'd only just worked up to the idea of dialing it, and she realized it was Margaret who had dialed it for her from the kitchen without saying so. She could see Margaret in the kitchen doorway, watching her, holding her own phone, expression neutral, in the particular way of someone who has done a brave thing and is not going to apologize for it. Emma looked at the screen. She looked at Margaret. She thought about the morning, the weight of it, the length of it, the way a single question from a gray-eyed stranger had cracked something open she'd been holding shut for 4 years. She answered the phone. Hello, said the voice on the other end, warm and practical and not rushing anywhere. My name is Karen. I understand you've been thinking about your options. Emma pressed the phone against her ear. She pulled Biscuit onto her lap. She took one breath. I have, she said. I have a few questions. And she began to talk. Karen talked for 22 minutes. Emma didn't say much. She asked her 3 questions, the ones she'd circled on the printout, the ones she'd been carrying in her apron for weeks, like a map she wasn't sure she was allowed to use, and Karen answered all of them without making her feel stupid for asking. She explained the process for the restraining order. She explained what the shelter could offer and what it couldn't. She explained that Emma's situation, a shared workplace, a partner with law enforcement connections, no formal report on record, was not unusual. She said that word the way Reaper had said complicated, landing on it, meaning it, not rushing past it to something easier. When Karen finished, she said, "You don't have to decide anything today." "I know," Emma said, "but I think I already have." A pause. "When you're ready. Tomorrow," Emma said. "I want to do it tomorrow. Can that work?" "We'll make it work," Karen said. "Call me in the morning. First thing." Emma hung up. She sat with the phone in her lap and biscuit on her feet and the afternoon light coming through the window at a long angle, and Margaret standing in the kitchen doorway, not pretending she hadn't been listening. "Tomorrow," Emma said. Margaret nodded once. "I'll help you pack." "I don't have much." "Then it won't take long." Emma looked at the room around her. 4 years of her life in it, a couch she'd picked out herself, photos on the wall, a coffee maker she'd saved 3 weeks to buy. The geography of a life that had been real, even when it had also been wrong. The particular ache of leaving something that has been both home and trap. "I want to go back to the diner," Emma said. Margaret raised her eyebrows. "Today, I left in the middle of a shift." She stood up, straightened her apron. "I have tables." Margaret looked at her for a moment at the set of her jaw and the steadiness in her eyes and the particular quality of a person who has made a large decision and needs right now to do something ordinary with her hands. "All right," Margaret said, "let's go." When they walked back into the diner at 2:15, the lunch crowd had mostly cleared, and the remaining bikers were spread through the booths in the easy posture of men who have made themselves at home. Cody was at the counter talking to a local kid named Jesse, who worked at the gas station, and who had come over ostensibly for a sandwich, actually to get closer to the motorcycles. Hector Montoya was at a corner table with a coffee and a legal pad. Reaper was standing near the door talking to a man Emma didn't immediately recognize, tall, silver-haired, in a plain gray shirt, until she got closer and saw the clerical collar. She stopped. "Is that Father Dennis?" Margaret said quietly. "He runs the community center on 4th. I called him while you were talking to Karen." Emma looked at Margaret. "How many calls did you make this morning?" "Enough," Margaret said. Father Dennis noticed Emma and excused himself from Reaper and crossed the room. He was about 60, with the kind of face that had listened to a great many things and remained fundamentally undisturbed by what it had heard. He shook her hand. "I won't take your time," he said. "Margaret told me a little. I just want you to know that the community center has a legal aid clinic on Thursdays. Pro bono. The woman who runs it, her name is Patricia Osei. She's handled restraining orders before. Good ones that stick." He pressed a card into her hand, and then, "No pressure, no strings. It's just a resource." Emma looked at the card. She looked at Father Dennis. She looked at Reaper, who was leaning against the wall with his arms folded and his expression carefully neutral, in the way of a man who has been orchestrating things all day and has decided not to point that out. "You called a priest," she said to him. "Margaret called a priest," he said. "I just had the conversation." "What did you talk about?" "Cedar Falls," he said, "and what kind of town it wants to be." Father Dennis smiled small real and said his goodbyes and left. Emma stood holding the business card. Then she put it in her apron pocket alongside the restraining order printout, and for the first time all day, both of them were in there together, which felt like something. She picked up her order pad. She went back to work. Hector Montoya had been at that corner table for 40 minutes when Reaper finally sat down across from him. They looked at each other for a moment. Two men who'd spent the day on the same side of something without quite having agreed to it. "She called Mason County," Reaper said. Hector exhaled. "Good. She wants to file tomorrow. I can be there." Hector looked at his legal pad. He'd been writing, Reaper noticed, not notes exactly, but something more deliberate. Dates, names, a list that had the particular structure of a formal record. "I've been documenting what I observed today as a law enforcement officer who was present." He looked up. "It's not much, but it's something on paper. Something with a badge number attached." Reaper looked at the legal pad. "You've been doing that all afternoon." "I should have done it 2 years ago," Hector said flatly. He didn't say it with self-pity. He said it the way you state a fact that you've stopped trying to make more comfortable. "I knew. Everybody knew. And he stopped. "This town has a bad habit of looking the other way on the wrong things." "Most towns do," Reaper said. "Doesn't make it right." "No, it doesn't." Hector tapped his pen on the legal pad. "Derek's brother Brian called me an hour ago. He's angry. He thinks I should have cleared you all out this morning." He paused. "I told him I did my job." He didn't love that answer. Will he be a problem? Brian's a lot of talk. Hector set the pen down. Derek's the problem, and Derek now knows that Emma has people. Real ones. That changes the risk calculation for him. He looked at Reaper steadily. But he's going to test it, probably sooner than you'd like. When you leave, Hector said simply. That's the window. When the motorcycles are gone and it's just Emma in Cedar Falls. Reaper said nothing for a moment. This was the part he'd been thinking about since the patio, since Emma had said he'd find me with the particular matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has tested that specific theory and found it true. The shelter was temporary. The restraining order was paper. Hector was one person. What would make that window smaller? Reaper asked. Hector thought about it. Community, he said, real community. The kind where Derek knows that any move he makes gets seen by 10 people, and those 10 people have decided they're not staying quiet anymore. He looked around the diner at Harold Briggs still in his booth, who had already called 2 people that Hector knew of to tell them what had happened this morning. At the couple from table 2 who'd stayed 2 hours past their meal and had spoken to Margaret at length before they left. At Cody still talking to Jesse at the counter, Jesse, who would go back to the gas station and talk to whoever came through. I think today might have started that, Hector said quietly, but it needs to keep going after you're gone. Reaper nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee, cold by now he didn't care, and thought, what if it kept going, he said. Hector looked at him. What do you mean? What if this wasn't just today? Reaper set the cup down. What if the chapter came back not for drama, not for show, a charity ride, a fundraiser for the shelter, something that put names and faces in Cedar Falls regularly enough that Derek Marsh knows this isn't a Tuesday thing. He paused. We've done it before. Other towns. It works. Hector was quiet for a moment. Hell's Angels doing charity work in Cedar Falls, he said slowly. You got a problem with that. I have a deeply complicated relationship with it, Hector said, but the corner of his mouth moved. Talk to Father Dennis. He runs the community events board. A beat. He already has your number, I'm guessing. Margaret gave it to him an hour ago. Hector shook his head slowly. Margaret, he said with a particular tone of a man who has underestimated a woman he's known for years and is recalibrating. She called the shelter a priest and a legal aid clinic in 3 hours, Reaper said, while running a lunch service short-staffed. She called me too, Hector said. Last week about Emma. Reaper looked at him. Hector met his eyes. I told her I'd look into it. I didn't look fast enough. He said it the same way he'd said everything directly without softening it for his own comfort. I'm looking now. That's what matters, Reaper said. You saw him. Is it enough? Reaper thought about Lena. He thought about the coroner's report and the 2 lines and the phone going to voicemail. He thought about the question, is enough ever really enough, and what it costs to carry it. It's what we have, he said, so we make it enough. At 3:45, Derek came back. He didn't come into the diner. He parked his truck on the street, not in the lot on the street, as if the lot still belonged to him, and he was choosing not to use it, and he sat in it for 11 minutes, which Cody timed from the counter before he got out. He walked to the front door, stopped, looked through the glass. The diner still had 9 bikers in it, Hector Montoya at his corner table, Harold Briggs, who had at this point been here for 9 hours and showed no signs of leaving, Margaret behind the counter, Emma moving between the remaining 2 occupied tables with her order pad back straight, chin level. Derek stood at the door for 32 seconds. Reaper counted. He did not move from where he was sitting. He did not stand up. He just looked directly, steadily across the length of the diner and through the glass door at Derek standing on the other side of it. Derek's hand came up toward the door handle. Stopped. He looked at Reaper. Reaper looked back at him. 12 seconds of absolute stillness. Then Derek's hand dropped. He turned around. He walked back to his truck. He sat in it for 3 more minutes. Then he drove away. Cody let out a breath that was almost a word. That's it. That's it, Diesel said. He just left. Men like Derek don't operate when the lights are on, Diesel said. He picked up his coffee. He needed dark. We didn't give him any. Emma had stopped in the middle of the diner. She'd seen it, all of it, through the glass. She stood with her order pad at her side and watched Derek's truck disappear down the street, and something moved through her face that was not triumph exactly. It was quieter than triumph, more complicated. The expression of someone watching a chapter of their life drive away and not yet knowing exactly who they are without it. Reaper came to stand beside her. She didn't look at him. He'll try again, she said. Probably. Maybe not when you're here, but later. Yes, she looked at him then. You're not going to pretend that's not true. No, she nodded. Good. She looked back at the street. I don't want people pretending things. I've had enough of that. She exhaled. But I called Karen, and I have Hector, and I have the printout. She touched her apron pocket. And tomorrow I'm packing. All right, he said. I'm scared, she said. Just that. Directly. The same voice she'd used in the booth that morning, the voice underneath the managed voice. I know, he said. Does that go away? He thought about it honestly. It changes, he said. It doesn't disappear, but it changes into something you can use instead of something that uses you. She was quiet for a moment. Did it change for you after your sister? The question landed where it landed. He let it. It took a long time, he said, and it looked like this. He gestured slightly barely at the room around them. At the bikers and Hector and Harold and Margaret and the card in her pocket and the number on her phone. Doing something instead of nothing. Every time. Emma looked at the room. At all of it. At the Tuesday that had started like every other Tuesday and had turned into something she didn't have a word for yet, but that felt under the fear and the exhaustion and the specific grief of leaving something, even when leaving is right, like the first day of a different life. I need to clear table 4, she said. Okay, she went to him. The twist came at 4:30, and it came from the direction no one had been watching. Brian Marsh, Derek's actual brother, the one who'd been on the phone, the one who'd sent Briley the one, Hector had described as a lot of talk was not a lot of talk today. He came in through the back. Not the front door, not with the bell and the third hinge squeak, but through the service entrance at the rear of the kitchen. The door that connected to the alley, the door that staff used, the door that Brian Marsh had a key to, because Derek had given him one 6 months ago, and no one had thought to change the lock. Margaret heard it first. The sound of that particular door, which had a different sound than the front, a heavier sound, a back of the building sound. She turned from the coffee station and looked at the kitchen, and her stomach dropped before her brain had fully caught up. Emma. But Brian was already through. He was not as large as Derek, but he had the particular energy of a man who had worked himself into a conviction on the drive over the flushed, forward-leaning energy of someone who has decided that action is the same thing as being right. He had his badge clipped to his belt. He had his off-duty weapon in its holster. He had the expression of a man who has decided that the rules he normally operates under don't quite apply to this specific situation. He looked around the kitchen. Empty, the prep work was done. The lunch service was over. He pushed through the kitchen door into the dining room. Emma saw him first. She froze a different freeze than this morning's, not the managed stillness of someone holding themselves together, but the instantaneous full-body recognition of a specific threat. Brian, she said. You need to drop whatever this is, Brian said. He wasn't shouting. He was worse than shouting. He was controlled. The voice of someone who has authority and has decided to use it sideways. Derek is my brother, whatever these people, Mom. He looked at the bikers, at Reaper, at the room, with the particular contempt of a man who has walked into a situation he thinks he can reshape by force of presence. Whatever they told you, whatever they think they're doing here. Brian, Hector's voice from the corner table, sharp and immediate. Stop. Brian looked at him. Hector, you came in through a private entrance without permission, Hector said. He was already standing. That's trespassing. And you're off duty, you're not here in any official capacity, and you need to stop talking right now. I'm here as Derek's family. Then take off the badge, Hector said, and we'll have that conversation. But as long as that badge is on your belt, you are operating as law enforcement, and as law enforcement, you have just trespassed into a private establishment through a service entrance without a warrant or an invitation. He came around the table. I'm going to ask you one time to walk back through that kitchen and out the door you came in. Brian looked at him. The conviction was still there, but something underneath it had shifted the specific recalibration of a man who has made a tactical error and is trying to figure out whether he can walk it back. This isn't Hector, Margaret's voice from the counter. He has a key to my kitchen. Her voice was completely level. I would like it back. The room took that in. Brian reached into his pocket. Slowly, he put the key on the nearest table. He looked at Reaper, who had not stood up, had not moved, had remained in his chair with his hands visible, and his expression the particular neutral of a man who is letting the situation handle itself, because the situation right now is handling itself. "You think you fixed something today?" Brian said to him. "I had breakfast," Reaper said. "Derek is going to—" "Brian," Hector said. One word, the word that ends the sentence. Brian Marsh looked at the room one more time, at Hector, at Margaret with her hand on the counter and 30 years of ownership behind her, at Harold Briggs, who had outlasted everyone and was looking at Brian with the unimpressed clarity of a 73-year-old man who remembers Brian as a 17-year-old who once threw a baseball through the hardware store window and cried about it. He went back through the kitchen. The service door closed. The room held its breath for 3 seconds. Then Cody from the counter said, "Can we change that lock today?" With the practical urgency of someone who has identified the actual problem, and Margaret was already on the phone with the locksmith before he'd finished the sentence. Emma sat down. She didn't mean to. Her knees made the decision independently, and she ended up on the stool at the counter with both hands pressed flat on the surface. Reaper was beside her in 4 steps. "You okay?" he said. "Yes." She looked at her hands. "Actually, yes. Which is—" She shook her head. "This morning I would have—" She stopped, tried again. "This morning that would have ended differently. He would have come in and I would have done what he said. Because that's what you do. Because the path of least resistance when someone with authority is angry at you is to just—" She stopped again. "Give them what they want," Reaper said. "And this time I didn't," she said. "I didn't even have to. Hector was he was there." She looked across the room at Hector, who was on his phone calling it, in his voice low and official, the language of a man making a record. He was already there. "He was waiting for someone to let him do the right thing," Reaper said, "same as he was all morning." Emma looked at him. "Is that what you did? Let people do the right thing?" He considered it. "I sat in a diner," he said, "and stayed long enough for the right thing to have room to happen." She was quiet for a moment. Something was moving across her face, not the managed expression she'd worn all morning, not the public face, but something underneath all of it. Gratitude was part of it, but not the clean, simple kind. The complicated kind, the kind that comes mixed with grief and recognition and the particular ache of realizing how long you've gone without something before you understood it was missing. "Marcus," she said, his real name, the first time she'd used it. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. Small. The way he'd nodded at her through the diner window that morning after Derek had gone back in the kitchen and she'd pressed her lips together and breathed through something nobody else could see. A full circle. The same gesture. The same distance, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to leave her. "Call your mother tonight," he said. Emma blinked. "What?" "You said she moved to Arizona. Call her tonight. Tell her what you're doing." He paused. "She'll want to know." Emma's eyes went bright. She looked at the counter. She nodded. Hector finished his call and came over. "I filed it," he said. "Brian's going to get a call from his lieutenant tonight. It'll be handled quietly, family connection. They'll try to minimize it, but it's on record." He looked at Emma. "Which means tomorrow when we file for the restraining order, there's already a pattern in the system. That matters." Emma looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" Hector met her eyes. "Because you were in the 8th grade when I met you," he said, "and because I've been parking outside this diner for 2 years and calling it observation." He paused. "It wasn't observation. It was waiting, and I'm done waiting." Emma pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she took it down. "Okay," she said, "okay." Harold Briggs in his booth folded his newspaper for the first time all day. He stood up with the deliberate movement of a man whose joints have opinions about long days. He came to the counter and put down a $20 bill for a coffee that had cost $2.50. He looked at Emma. "I taught high school for 31 years, he said. "I had a lot of students. Some of them I think about still." He put his hat on. "You were always one of the good ones. Anyone who couldn't see that wasn't worth seeing." He tipped his hat an actual old-fashioned hat tip, which he performed with complete sincerity, and walked to the door. The bell rang. 3rd hinge squeak. Emma looked at the 20 on the counter. She was not quite crying. She was doing the thing that is right next to crying, which is in some ways harder. Margaret put an arm around her shoulders and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that the arm wasn't already saying. Outside, the evening was coming in. The light was changing long and golden and horizontal, the light that turns ordinary things into something else. The motorcycles were still in the lot, still gleaming, though several of the men had drifted out there, and Reaper could hear their voices through the window, easy and low. Some of them were talking to locals. Cody and Jesse had apparently found common ground over an argument about truck engines. Patch was showing two teenage boys something about a carburetor. Cedar Falls was a small town. Small towns talk. By tomorrow morning, what had happened in Margaret's diner on a Tuesday in July would have traveled to every kitchen table and every front porch and every parking lot conversation that happened in a 20-block radius. Derek Marsh knew that too, which was why at 6:47 p.m., as the last of the bikers were finishing their second dinner, and Margaret was turning the sign on the door from open to closed, a text arrived on Emma's phone from a number she recognized. 4 words, "I won't bother you." Emma stared at the screen. She read it 3 times. She showed it to Reaper. He read it, said nothing for a moment, then screenshot it. "Is it, do you think he means it?" Reaper handed the phone back to her. "Screenshot it," he said again. "Send it to Hector and then—" He paused. "And then don't answer." She screenshotted it. She sent it to Hector. She put the phone in her pocket. "And then," she said, "and then go home," he said. "Pack 1 bag, call your mother, get some sleep." He met her eyes. "Tomorrow is a big day." Emma looked at him. She looked at the diner at the booths where 12 bikers had settled into her morning and 35 more had rolled in by noon, and a room full of people had stopped looking away. At the counter where she'd stood all day, where she'd frozen and steadied and broken slightly and held and finally spoken. She looked at her hands. "1 bag," she said. "1 bag," he confirmed. "You can get the rest later when it's safe." She nodded. She untied her apron. She folded it carefully, the particular care of someone who has worn the same apron for 3 years and is taking it off for the last time in a specific way, and she laid it on the counter. "Margaret," she said. "I know, honey," Margaret said. "See you Thursday." Emma looked at her. "Thursday. You'll still need a job," Margaret said simply. "New shift, better hours. Derek's not in my kitchen anymore, which means I've got an opening, and I've been meaning to talk to you about management for 6 months." She picked up the apron and folded it more precisely. "We'll talk Thursday." Emma stood with that for a moment. Then she did something she hadn't done all day. Not the almost smiles, not the short, broken laugh, but a real one, full and sudden and completely unguarded, the smile of a person who has been waiting a long time for a reason. "Thursday," she said. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back at Reaper. "Columbus," she said. He raised his eyebrows. "That's 4 hours," she said, "but it's not a different planet." Something moved in his face, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him all day. "No," he said, "it's not." She walked out. The door closed without the bell. She'd gone out the side door, the patio door, quietly, privately, the way you leave when you're not performing anything for anyone. Just leaving. Reaper stood in the empty diner and listened to the sound of his men outside, and the distant sound of a car starting, and the evening birds beginning in the trees on Elm Street. Then his phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize, a Cedar Falls area code. He answered it. Marcus Stone, a woman's voice, businesslike, warm underneath. "This is Patricia Osei. I run the legal aid clinic at the community center. Father Dennis told me about your day." A pause. "I understand we have a filing tomorrow." "First thing," Reaper said. "I'll be there at 8, Patricia said. "I've handled 47 restraining orders in this county, every single one of them stuck." Another pause, and then something in her voice softened. "What you did today, I want you to know that kind of thing, it doesn't happen here. People don't usually—" She stopped. "It matters." Reaper looked out the window at the parking lot, at 35 motorcycles in the last of the day's light. "We had good coffee," he said. Patricia Osei laughed a full, real laugh and said she'd see them in the morning, and hung up. Diesel appeared at Reaper's shoulder. "We stay in tonight." Reaper looked at the parking lot, at his men, at the town of Cedar Falls, which had spent one Tuesday finding out what it was made of and had come up with a better answer than it probably expected. "We're staying," he said. "The motel on Route 9 has 12 rooms," Diesel said. "I already checked." "Of course you did." Someone has to think ahead. Diesel paused. She gonna need to be okay? Reaper thought about the phone in her apron pocket. The printout with the circled questions, the 22-minute call to Karen, the text she'd screenshotted the Thursday shift, the bag she was packing, the phone call she was going to make to her mother in Arizona. He thought about the smile, full and sudden and completely unguarded. Yes, he said, she's going to be okay. Patricia Osei arrived at 8:02. She was 43 years old, wore a gray blazer over a blue shirt, and carried a leather folder that had seen better days but still closed with authority. She shook Reaper's hand in the parking lot of the community center, the way people shake hands when they mean it, firm, brief, direct. And then she said, "Where's Emma?" And when Reaper said, "Coming," Patricia nodded once and said, "Good." And that was the whole greeting. Emma arrived at 8:09, Farron. Margaret drove her. They parked and Emma came across the lot with her bag on her shoulder. One bag, as Reaper had said, a gray duffel that had lived under her bed for 3 years. And she looked like a person who had slept maybe 4 hours and called her mother for 2 of them and had arrived on the other side of both experiences, raw and clear-eyed and absolutely present. She shook Patricia's hand. "You read the paperwork I sent last night?" Patricia asked. "3 times, Emma said. "Good questions in your email." "I had a lot of questions." "You'll have more after this morning." Patricia looked at her steadily. "That's normal. The goal today is simple. We file, we document, we create a legal wall between you and Derek Marsh. It won't feel like enough. It never feels like enough. But it is the first real thing and every real thing after it gets built on top of this one." She paused. "Are you ready?" Emma looked at the building. At the door, at the ordinary institutional Tuesday morning fact of a community center in Cedar Falls that she had driven past 1,000 times and never once imagined walking into for this reason. "Yes," she said. They went inside. Reaper stayed in the parking lot. He wasn't going in, this was Emma's, not his, and the distinction mattered and he knew it. He sat on the hood of Margaret's car with his coffee and he looked at the sky, which was the particular clear blue of a morning that has decided to be uncomplicated. And he thought about Lena one more time, and this time the thought felt different. Not smaller grief, it doesn't get smaller, but different in the way a scar feels different from a wound. It had finally, after 16 years, begun to change form. Diesel pulled up on his bike at 8:15. He parked, killed the engine, sat. "How long?" he said. "Hour, maybe 2, Reaper said. "Columbus by tonight." "Columbus by tonight." Diesel nodded. He looked at the door Emma had gone through. "She called her mother last night. Karen from the shelter told me this morning when I checked in." He paused. "Her mother's flying in from Arizona on Thursday." Reaper looked at him. "Karen told you." "Margaret told Karen. Karen told me." Diesel shrugged with the slight defensiveness of a man whose information network is more active than he likes to advertise. "We've been in contact." "Since when?" "Since yesterday when you sent me to the apartment and I realized I was the only one without a phone number for anyone useful." He looked at his hands. Her mother cried. On the phone with Emma, Karen heard it from the next room. A pause. Good tears. Reaper looked back at the sky. Good tears, the kind that means something is moving that has been still too long. "Hector file his report?" Reaper asked. "Filed at 7:15 a.m. Brian Marsh's lieutenant called Brian at 8. Brian has been reassigned to desk duty pending a conduct review." Diesel said it with the particular satisfaction of a man reading a final score. "Derek found out 20 minutes ago. He called Hector directly." "And Hector didn't answer." Reaper almost smiled. "Derek called Margaret," Diesel continued. "She answered. He said, and I'm quoting, 'This isn't over.'" Diesel paused. Margaret said, "Good morning, Derek," and hung up. Then she called her locksmith to confirm the service door was done. Another pause. "It was done. New lock, new keys. Margaret has all of them." Reaper sat with this for a moment. The architecture of what had been built in 24 hours. One phone call to a shelter, a legal pad filled with dates and times, a priest with a business card, a $20 bill on a counter, a screenshot of 4 words, an 8 a.m. appointment with a woman in a gray blazer who had handled 47 restraining orders and watched every one of them stick. None of it dramatic, none of it clean or complete or finished. All of it real. "He'll test it," Reaper said. "Derek." "Of course he will. When we're gone." "Yes." "So we come back," Reaper said. Diesel looked at him. "The charity ride." "Father Dennis already said yes last night." He texted at 11 p.m. The community events board meets next week. Reaper picked up his coffee. First ride in 6 weeks. We come back with 40 people and a check for the Mason County shelter, and we make enough noise on Route 9 that every person in Cedar Falls knows this chapter comes back to Cedar Falls. He paused. Regularly. Diesel was quiet for a moment. You know what the guys are going to say? I know. They're going to say this is a lot of effort for a town we rode through by accident. I know. And what are you going to say? My. Reaper looked at the door of the community center. I'm going to say Lena would have wanted us to, he said, simply, without drama, the way you say something true that you've spent 16 years finding the right words for. Diesel said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. Yeah, he said, she would have. The filing took an hour and 40 minutes. Emma came out at 9:52 with Patricia Osei at her side and a copy of the filed petition in her hand, paper official stamped real, and her face had the specific quality of someone who has just done the hardest easy thing they've ever done. It wasn't hard because of the paperwork. It was hard because of what the paperwork said out loud in legal language with her name on it about 4 years of a life she'd told herself was complicated. She walked straight to Reaper. She held up the paper. It's filed. He looked at it. How do you feel? She thought about it seriously the way he'd been serious with her all day yesterday. Like I took something that was only in my body and put it on paper, she said. Like it's outside me now, and she stopped. It's better. It's a lot better. Patricia Osei shook Reaper's hand again. She did well, she said. She knew exactly what she wanted to say. That's not always the case. She looked at Emma with the direct warmth of a professional who has seen people at their most fractured and remains invested in every single one. I'll call you when the order is served. Could be today, could be tomorrow. Keep your phone on. I will, Emma said. Patricia left. Emma stood in the parking lot with her duffel bag and her file petition in the particular, slightly stunned quality of someone standing at a beginning they've been building toward without quite knowing it. What now, she said. Mason County shelter, Margaret said from behind her. Karen has a room ready. You'll meet the other staff, see the space, decide if it's right. She put a hand on Emma's shoulder. And if it's not right, you come home with me. My guest room has been empty since Mike went to college, and I've been meaning to do something with it. Emma turned to look at her. Margaret, don't argue with me about it, Margaret said. I'm 62 years old and I own my building and I have opinions about how things should go. She said it with the particular authority of someone who has earned the right to be directive and is deploying it with full awareness. Emma didn't argue. She laughed again, that real unguarded laugh, and said, okay. And Margaret looked profoundly satisfied. Reaper walked Emma to Margaret's car. They stood at it for a moment, neither of them in a hurry to finish the conversation, both of them aware that it was finishing. I'm going to be someone different in 6 months, Emma said. She said it like a prediction, like a fact she was already certain of. I can feel it. Like I can feel who I'm going to be. I just can't see her clearly yet. That's exactly right, Reaper said. That's exactly what it feels like at the start. She looked at him. Did it feel like that for you when you decided to make it mean something about Lena? He thought about it. It felt like falling forward, he said. Like the only way to not fall was to keep moving. He paused. And then one day you realize you're not falling anymore. You're just walking, and it means something. Emma nodded slowly. She reached into her bag and pulled something out. She held it out to him. It was the restraining order printout, the one she'd had in her apron, the one with the circled questions in careful, deliberate handwriting. She'd taken it out of her apron last night and put it in her bag, and now she was holding it out to him with both hands, the way you hand someone something that you want them to keep. For the next one, she said, if you find another diner, She stopped. Give it to them. The information's still good. And tell them, she thought, tell them someone else used it. And it worked. He took it from her. He folded it carefully and put it in his vest pocket. I will, he said. She got in the car. Margaret got in. The car started. It pulled out of the lot and onto the street, and Reaper watched it until it turned off his sightline. And then he stood in the parking lot of the Cedar Falls Community Center with the morning full around him and the printout in his pocket, and 16 years of grief finally slowly beginning to turn into something he could use. The restraining order was served to Derek Marsh at 2:17 p.m. Hector Montoya served it himself. He drove to Derek's current address, his mother's house, as it turned out where he'd apparently been since leaving the diner parking lot the previous afternoon, and he knocked on the door, and when Derek opened it, Hector handed him the papers with the particular professional courtesy of a man who is doing his job and is not going to apologize for it. Derek looked at the papers. He looked at Hector. "You did this," he said. "Patricia Osei did this," Hector said. "Emma did this." He paused. "I just delivered it." He held Derek's gaze. "You come within 100 yards of her, her workplace, or her residence, and I will personally process the violation. That is not a threat. That is information." Derek said nothing. "I grew up here too," Hector said more quietly. "I know your family. I knew your father." He let that land. "And I know what you learned in that house, Derek. I'm not pretending it was easy." He paused. "But you're 31 years old. At some point, what you learned and what you choose are two different things. You understand me?" Derek looked at the papers in his hands. His jaw worked. "Get some help," Hector said. "Real help. Not for Emma, not for the legal situation. For yourself." He stepped back. "That's all I've got." He walked back to his patrol car. He sat in it. He looked at the house for a moment at the closed door. Then he drove back toward Route 9 and Margaret's diner and everything that had already changed, and he called his wife and told her he was going to be late for dinner, and she said, "Okay," and he said, "I love you." And she said, "I love you too," and it was ordinary and real, and it cost him nothing, and he hadn't said it enough lately, and he was going to start. The twist that closed the day came from the last person anyone expected. At 4 p.m., as Reaper was loading his saddlebags for the ride to Columbus, a woman walked across the diner parking lot toward him. She was about 65 small, with gray hair and the careful posture of someone managing a bad hip or old grief or both. He'd never seen her before. She stopped in front of him. "Are you the one they call Reaper?" she said. "Marcus Stone," he said. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "My name is Ruth Callan," she said. "I live on Birch Street. My daughter is in a situation." She said it exactly the way Margaret had said it on the phone to Karen, the particular careful phrasing of a person naming something they've been afraid to name directly. "Has been for 2 years. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to—" She stopped. Her voice was steady, but only just. "Someone told me what happened here yesterday. What you did." Reaper looked at her, at the lines in her face and the way her hands held her purse tight like something she was anchoring herself to. "Tell me about your daughter," he said. Ruth Callan told him. He listened to every word. Behind him, Diesel appeared at his shoulder. Listened, took out his phone and started making a note. Patricia Osei's number, Hector's number, Karen's number, and Mason County. The numbers that had assembled themselves over one Tuesday and had already become something more than a list. When Ruth finished, she looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has said the thing out loud for the first time and is not sure yet what that costs. "Can you help her?" Ruth asked. Reaper looked at Diesel. Diesel looked at him. "We have some people we can connect you with," Reaper said. "Right now, today." He paused. "And we're going to be back in Cedar Falls in 6 weeks. If she needs more, then we'll be here." Ruth pressed her lips together. Her eyes went bright. She nodded once, the nod of someone receiving something they'd stopped believing was available. "Thank you," she said. Her voice broke on the second word just slightly, just enough to be real. "Call Karen tonight," Reaper said. He gave her the number from memory. He'd already memorized it without quite deciding to. "Tell her Marcus Stone said to call. She'll pick up." Ruth Callan put the number in her phone with the careful concentration of someone who knows this is important. She thanked him again. She walked back across the parking lot. Diesel watched her go. 2 years, he said. "At least," Reaper said. "How many Ruth Callans are there?" Diesel said. "In how many towns?" Reaper looked at Route 9, at the long flat stretch of road that went east and west and connected Cedar Falls to every other town that had learned to look away from the wrong things. "Enough," he said. "That's the answer. There are enough that we have work to do." He picked up his helmet. "Let's ride." The chapter left Cedar Falls at 4:47 p.m., 35 motorcycles pulled out of the lot in two lines, and the sound of them, that deep rolling wall of thunder sound that had rattled the diner windows just 24 hours ago, moved through the main street of Cedar Falls one more time. People came to windows. The kid from the gas station, Jesse, stood at the pump and watched them go and raised one hand, a wave or a salute, hard to tell, and Cody in line raised a hand back. Harold Briggs was sitting on the bench outside the hardware store because Harold Briggs was the kind of man who sat on benches outside hardware stores and had been for 40 years. He watched the motorcycles roll past. He nodded once in the serious, dignified way of a man acknowledging something that deserved to be acknowledged. Father Dennis, coming out of the community center, stopped on the steps and watched them go, with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who had been in Cedar Falls for 20 years and had seen it be a lot of things and was glad today that it had been this. Margaret stood in the door of the diner. She watched until the last bike was out of sight and the sound had faded to nothing and Route 9 was just Route 9 again. Then she went back inside and started the prep for tomorrow's breakfast and thought about Thursday and the conversation she was going to have with Emma about management hours and a real salary and what it meant to build something that was yours. And in Mason County at the Women's Resource Center, Emma Reyes was sitting in a small, clean room with her gray duffel on the floor and Biscuit in a carrier beside her. Karen had said yes to the cat, without hesitation, the way people say yes to the thing that matters. And she was on the phone with her mother, who was telling her what flight she'd booked and when she would land, and that she was bringing Emma's grandmother's quilt because it was good for sleeping in new places. "I'm scared, Mom," Emma said. "Eesh. Not the managed version. No. The real one." "I know, baby," her mother said. "Do it anyway." "I am. I know you are." Emma looked at the room, at the walls and the window and the afternoon light and the new geography of a life that was hers to fill. It was not a large room. It was not a beautiful room. It was a room that was safe, which was not nothing. It was right now everything. 6 weeks later, 41 motorcycles rolled into Cedar Falls on a Saturday morning. They came with a banner, Cedar Falls Charity Ride for Mason County Shelter, and a check that Cody had organized going diner to diner and business to business in every town between Columbus and Cedar Falls. That was large enough to make Karen from Mason County press both hands over her mouth when she saw the amount. Father Dennis had organized a block party on Elm. Margaret had catered it. Hector Montoya provided the permits. Harold Briggs showed up early and stayed late and brought his wife, who brought pie, and the pie was exceptional. Emma was there. She'd moved into Margaret's guest room 2 weeks after the shelter, and the guest room had become something more permanent in the way things do when two people discover they suit each other's company. She was working the Thursday management shift. She was in weekly sessions with a counselor from the resource center. She was sleeping through the night more often than not, which was new, which still surprised her sometimes when she woke up. She was also, as of the previous Thursday, enrolled part-time at the community college in Mason County, business administration, because Margaret had said quietly and once that she was not going to be here forever, and the diner needed someone who understood the numbers, and Emma had looked at her and said, "Are you serious?" And Margaret had said, "I never say things I'm not serious about," which was completely true. When the motorcycles pulled in on Saturday morning, Emma was standing with Margaret in front of the diner. She watched them come. She watched Reaper come off Route 9 at the front of the line and pull into the lot with the same deliberate, unhurried authority as the first time 6 weeks ago, and park and get off his bike and look around the block party and find her face. He crossed the lot. "How are you?" he said. "Better," she said, "than actually better, not perform better." He heard the distinction. "Good." "My mother comes again next month," she said. "She likes Margaret." Everyone likes Margaret. "She's taken over my counseling appointments. As in, she comes with me and then takes me to lunch after, and we eat, and she tells me things about my grandmother that I didn't know." Emma paused. "Apparently my grandmother left a man once too, 1958. Nobody in the family ever talked about it." Reaper took that in. "There's a lot of things nobody talks about," Emma said, "until somebody does." She looked at him steadily. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and held something out. He looked at it. It was a new printout, not the old one he'd taken from her hands in the parking lot 6 weeks ago, a new one updated with a different design with additional resources, with Emma's own handwriting in the margins. More notes than the original. better questions. The kind of annotations that come from someone who has been through the process and knows which questions actually matter. For the next diner, she said. Next town, whoever needs it. He took it, he looked at it, he looked at her. You updated it, he said. Patricia helped me, she said. We added the legal aid section and a part about what to do when the other person has a badge connection. She paused. Because that's a real thing and the original didn't cover it. He folded it, put it in his vest pocket, same pocket as before. It fit the same way. Emma, he said. She waited. Lena would have liked you, he said. He said it simply without weight, the way you say something that is just true. She was smart like you, funny, stubborn in exactly the right direction when she finally got there. Emma's eyes went bright. She held them steady. I'm sorry she didn't get here, Emma said. Me too, he said. Every day. He paused. But this helps. He meant the block party, the check, the 41 motorcycles, the restraining order that had held for 6 weeks, the college enrollment, the grandmother's quilt on Margaret's guest bed, the phone calls with Karen, the new locks on the diner's service door, Harold Briggs eating pie on a folding chair, and talking to Cody about baseball like they'd known each other for years. He meant all of it. This helps. Emma nodded. She looked at the street at Cedar Falls being today the town it had always had the capacity to be and had mostly not quite managed. Derek left, she said, 3 weeks ago, moved to his cousins in Toledo. I heard, Reaper said. Hector told you. Diesel told me. Hector told Diesel. He paused. We have a communication system. I know you do, she said with the tone of someone who has made peace with being surrounded by people who are going to keep an eye on her whether or not she asks them to. She looked at him. Are you going to be okay, she said. You, not me. You. He looked at her. You've been carrying Lena for 16 years, she said, and you came here and did all of this, and I want to know if you're okay. He stood with the question. He didn't deflect it. He didn't turn it back to her. He let it be what it was, a real question from a person who had learned what it cost to be asked one and was paying it forward directly without ceremony. I'm working on it, he said. That's a real answer, she said. It's the true one. She nodded. She put out her hand and he shook it, and then she pulled him into a brief, complete embrace, the kind that doesn't linger or perform anything, but that says in its exact right length what it means. And then she stepped back and turned to Margaret, who was calling her name from the catering table, because apparently someone had gotten into the potato salad before the blessing. Reaper watched her go. He watched her navigate the crowd, the bikers and the locals, and Father Dennis and Harold and the Mason County shelter staff who had come for the check presentation, and she moved through all of it with her chin level and her back straight and her hands easy at her sides. Not the managed version, not the practiced brightness, just Emma moving through a Saturday in a town that had decided to see her in a life that was beginning to fit. He put his hand in his vest pocket, felt the folded paper there, the updated printout with its careful margins and better questions, and the note at the bottom in Emma's handwriting that he'd read 3 times in the parking lot. You are not the only one. There are people who will stand up. Let them. He looked at Route 9, at the long road east, at all the towns between here and everywhere else, each of them with their diners and their silences and their mornings that started ordinary, and the particular possibility that today might be the day someone walked in and stayed long enough for the right thing to have room to happen. He put his hand back at his side. Marcus Stone had come to Cedar Falls by accident on a Tuesday in July, looking for nothing more than coffee and road and the company of men who understood that sometimes you ride just to feel the miles under you. He had found a woman who was already trying to save herself. He had simply made sure she didn't have to do it alone. And in the one thing done at the one right time by the one person who happened to be paying attention, Lena finally got the ending she had deserved delivered 16 years late, through someone else's story in a diner on Route 9 in Cedar Falls, on a morning that changed everything it touched. Real heroes don't always arrive on time, but when they arrive, they stay until the job is done, and that in the end is everything.